Well, thanks for inviting me here.
No!
So, like you said, we are in the business of supporting raptors, and two big thrusts of us for our organization. One is to take in injured raptors, rehabilitate them, and release them back into the wild. And then the other thing is to bring raptors out into the community and let people meet them and learn about them. And so we get about, we've been running about 200 to 250 injured raptors admitted every year. But last year we had 336. So far this year we're about 280 birds admitted, so we're kind of on a trajectory to be over 300 this year as well. So that's only raptors that we do. And raptors basically is like hawks, owls, falcons, eagles, osprey, things like that. So raptors are a specific kind of bird that, for lack of a better description, they're killers, okay? These guys don't eat birdseed. Raptors seek out other live animals, hunt them, kill them, and eat them. That's how they work. And so they're kind of in the food chain up above most of the other things. And in the world, we don't have a lot of things that, most things fit in the food chain. The mouse eats the peanuts, and the raptor comes and eats the mouse, but there's nothing that usually comes and eats the raptor. Okay? They're kind of at the top of the food chain because they're very wary and they fly, and so it's very hard to sneak up on one. If they make it successfully to adulthood, they're pretty much good to go, and they'll live a long time and not be worried about getting eaten by something else. So we get a whole bunch of raptors, maybe 300 or so in a year. Our first goal is always to rehabilitate them and release them. We have a whole organization, we're a nonprofit, all staffed by volunteers. We pick up the injured birds, we take them, we treat them. We have some local veterinarians that work with us, also volunteer their services to help fix them up. And when we're finally ready to release them, then we release them back in the area that they were found, because that's their territory. So somebody was talking about eagles before, and there was an eagle that was out injured, and when they released him back, he'd kind of been out long enough that his mate had found another mate. And when he came back to resume his rightful place, there was a fight that ended up, I think, in his death. But they're very territorial, and so we try to be very careful to release them back to where they were. We're successful about half the time, and so some of the birds that heal up but they're not good enough to be released have become what we call our educational ambassadors. And so right now at Raptor we have 13 birds that will never be able to be released. There's the various issues about each one, and I'll tell you about the birds we have tonight. But they're not going to get better, so they're with us permanently, and they don't make very good pets. So you're not allowed to have them. We have to have permits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and from the Ohio Department of Wildlife in order to keep and have the birds. We have one kind of a permit that's called a rehab permit that lets us keep and rehabilitate the injured ones. We have another permit that's called an education permit that lets us have those non-releasable birds on the condition that we share them with the public for education. So they're kind of different from most other birds to handle, and even the vets, most vets are not really experienced with birds. Some of them do parrots or parakeets. Raptors is a whole other thing.
How did they, excuse me, how did you said there's about 300 a year, how do they get injured?
Most of them are presumably hit by cars because they're found nearby roadways with fairly substantial injuries. And we have other ones, but I'll say that's by far the biggest cause. They get caught in nets, they run into windows, they get caught in fences. Sometimes they get shot or trapped, but that is really the exception rather than the rule. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it can be a run of dumb luck. You know, a raptor has to go out every day and hunt for his meal. And if he is unsuccessful hunting that day, he's going to be out the next day hunting harder because he's hungry. And if there's a bad string of luck, perhaps a snap in the weather and there's no prey available, if the bird is not successful in finding a meal after 3 days or so, he's going to start getting weaker. And he'll be getting less able to hunt. And every now and then we'll get a bird that comes in and there's no apparent injuries, there's no broken bones or anything, but they're just emaciated. And if we catch them quick enough, we can feed them back up and get them healthy again. And sometimes maybe they weren't quite as smart as they needed to be. Nature doesn't give many animals a second chance, but we do. Sometimes it might have been a weather snap or something, but we do what we can in every case to rehabilitate them and release them back into the wild. So I have 2 birds to show tonight. These are both kind of, I'll say, bigger birds among our local raptors. And I have sort of the day shift and the night shift. So what I have is a red-tailed hawk and a great horned owl. They both kind of like the same kind of territory. So a red-tailed hawk and a great horned owl both like hunting over open areas. But one will be hunting in the daytime and the other in the nighttime. So they're sort of day shift, night shift. And I get the red-tail out here. And sometimes she bounds out of the box. Hopefully it's not going to be that exciting.
She's one of the ones that you can't put back in the wild?
Yes.
What is her injury?
Let me get her out here first. So this is Scarlet. There we go, got that out of the way. Not pretty.
That's how she grew up.
And she's a red-tailed hawk. So in the raptor world, the females are larger than the males, and this is a female, and so she's a big red-tailed hawk.
Is she afraid right now?
You know, I'm not sure she's afraid of anything. She is a big girl. She is ornery, and generally she knows that she owns a place. So, I mean, she can get spooked, but she is a tough, strong, ornery bird.
Was she trying to attack like you guys at all, or does she know better?
Well, you know, she's kind of big and ornery, and she's kind of heavy. She weighs about 3 pounds. Most people would look at her and think that maybe it's more than that, but about 3 pounds. And she's kind of intimidating. And so a lot of our educators are intimidated by her, and so she tends to not get used a whole lot other than people that come around to our facility and view her in her mew, so named the cage. So she's about 15 years old, and we normally would not know how old the birds are. You can't tell from looking at them. A red-tailed hawk, if you see her tail feathers, they've got that rusty color. That's where they get their name from. The first year of their life, they don't have those red colors on their tail feathers. So their initial feathers are juvenile feathers. They kind of have some stripes there. And so if you see a red-tailed hawk that doesn't have the red tail yet, you know that it's a year-old kind of a bird. So she came in, did not have a red tail yet, so she was a that-year bird and had been hit by a car. She broke her left wing. And raptors' wings are very delicate. All birds are. They have hollow bones. There's just, everything is built for lightness. And so it's very hard when they break.
Stuck there.
It's very hard when they break a bone to guarantee that it's in good alignment again when it heals up. And so there's a way that we take their wings up to try to get them in alignment. And we do that and we cross our fingers. And after 3 weeks or so, we unwrap it and we see how it took. And in her case, it healed back up, but not quite in very good alignment. And so she can fly, sort of, but when we have her in a flight cage that we use to evaluate birds prior to release, you could see her flying and not really 100%. You can even hear she's noisier when she flies. So in her case, that is something that the Raptors need to be 100% to have a sporting chance to get that next meal. And if they are not 100%, then what would happen is that she'd starve in short order. Yeah.
How much free time, like, to be free and fly, does she get?
Well, she doesn't really fly well. So she has her mew is what we call her place that she lives, is about 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot. And she has all of our birds that are our education birds have got some kind of handicap. So depending on the bird's particular handicap, their home is tailored for them. In her case, she can fly from the ground up to a perch pretty well, but she just can't fly for distances very well. And so I don't have to worry about her if somebody startles her, jumping and falling off and hurting herself. I don't have to worry about that with her. Birds will naturally go to the highest place that they can get to. If I had a 20-foot tall cage and there was a perch up there at 18 foot, that's where she'd be if she could get there. Even if she couldn't fly, if there was a ladder or a way to climb up there, they will naturally go to the highest point. And so we have some birds that have maybe a partially amputated wing, and I have to worry that if they got startled, they might fall off and fall to the ground and hurt themselves. And so their perches are set lower where they can't get into as much trouble.
Does she get along with the other birds?
They each have their own separate cage or home that's tailored to them. We don't generally put multiple birds, especially our program birds. Sometimes, I'll say mixing species, you can get big trouble. Sometimes even the same species, we'll find that in rehab, I might have 4 great horned owls in a flight cage that are being rehabilitated, and we'll watch them. If they're all about the same level of capability, they may all hold their own, but if one is decidedly impaired compared to the other ones, they may pick on it and even kill it. So it's something to watch for in our rehab efforts. Our education birds each have their own place to live. So she came in, yes?
The wingspan on a normal bird that has not been injured, what is the wingspan on the red tail?
She's probably about 4 feet, I don't know, she'll, yeah. About 4
Okay.
feet.
And they soar a lot too.
Yes, they are.
Yep.
And in fact, there are different kinds of hawks.
Right.
If you have a backyard bird feeder, you might have witnessed a Cooper's hawk. A Cooper's hawk eats other birds, and they are very zippy and agile, kind of high-strung birds. A red-tailed hawk and a red-shouldered hawk are what we call soaring hawks, or BDOs. And so they will, flap some, but then just soar without flapping. They're, while the Cooper's hawk's preferred way of hunting is to spot a bird in your feeder and go for it, sometimes bursting right into bushes when the other birds go to cover. The red-tailed hawk will find a perch that has a commanding view over an open area, and they'll just sit there and they're watching, and they have very good eyesight, and they'll see something down on the ground. And interestingly enough, roadway medians are an ideal source for their prey. And so if you wanted to see a red-tailed hawk in the wild, or in fact, if you wanted to see a raptor in the wild, I would tell you that the red-tailed hawk is the easiest to find. Get on I-71 or I-75 and drive along and look for a large bird perched on top of a light pole or a tree looking out over the median. So the medians, they cut the grass once in a while, but not short like a lawn, and they don't put a lot of chemicals on it. And so the medians are ideal places for mice and snakes and chipmunks and bunny rabbits and stuff like that, which are all things that the red-tailed hawk would eat. And so sometimes to their detriment, these highways, the medians, are such good areas for their prey that when they see something and they focus on it, to the exclusion of everything else, they'll go down and get it, and that's how they get hit by cars.
Where is your center located?
Oh, we are in Milford, on the edge of the Cincinnati Nature Center.
Oh.
So you can actually take the Fernwood Trail and see us. If you're going to the Nature Center, instead of turning on Tealtown off of Round Bottom Road, the road before that is Barg Salt Run, and that's where we are. We're not generally open to the public. We have an open house on the last Sunday of the month for every month except for December through February. Yes.
I've heard of the hawks coming down and taking small domestic pets out of yards.
It can happen.
How common is it and how big is, how?
It's not that common. These guys are not into working harder than they have to work. Okay. And so if there's bunny rabbits and mice and stuff, they'll be going after that. But if there's nothing else around, they get hungry. They're looking at everything as a possible meal. Now, how big? The bird is about 3 pounds, and I would say that if they're hungry, they might try to go for something that's 3 times their weight. But that would be the exception rather than the rule. But if somebody is losing cats, small dogs, a red-tailed hawk would be high on my list, and even more so a gray horned owl. And gray horned owls are the night shift version, but they are ornery, aggressive hunters. Gray horned owls are just impressive creatures.
What about the other types of hawks and stuff? We see them swooning down over the lake a lot, and it looks like they do nosedives.
Well, I guess that an osprey would hunt fish out of the lake, and an eagle would. The hawks generally would not. We have a lot of red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks. I'm sure that in Mariemont you have a lot of red-shouldered hawks. There's so many trees. And red-tails tend to like to hunt over open areas. They'll be in the edge of woods and then hunt out over fields. But we have a lot of trees around here. We see a lot of red-shouldered hawks that will sometimes build a nest in your front yard or your backyard if there's a lot of good trees around.
Now, is the red shoulder the same size as a red tail?
Red shoulder is a bit smaller. So this is a female. The Raptor world, the females are larger. She's 3 pounds. A male might be 2.5 pounds. A red shouldered hawk female might be 2 pounds, and a male 1.5 pounds. But they're a good sized bird, but definitely a size smaller than this. Red-tailed hawks are not real vocal. But interestingly, if you're watching a movie and they show an eagle soaring in the background and they have this kind of call that sounds pretty cool, that's usually a red-tail's call, because an eagle has a squeaky kind of that's not that impressive. So they'll dub in a red-tailed hawk's call instead of the eagle. But a red-shoulder hawk is a very loud bird. And so if you hear in your yard, you go outside and it goes, that'll be a red-shouldered hawk, and they're kind of rusty on the chest, don't have the red tail like this, and a bit smaller.
Are they as ornery as this one? Or?
Not quite as ornery, but maybe a little bit more high-strung as birds go. Red-tailed hawks do take to training. If you were interested in falconry in the state of Ohio, you have to become an apprentice to a master falconer, and the first bird that you must start with is a red-tailed hawk, because they're plentiful and they do take the training well. A master falconer can use some other birds, but you start out with the basic level, and red-tails work best.
How old do they become?
So the larger birds, typical, I'll say, record lifetimes in the wild are under the order of 25 to 30 years. A typical lifetime for the large bird is more like 10 to 15 years. And in captivity, they often live longer than that. So She is 15 years old, and we only know that because we had her since she was clearly a first-year bird. And so she's got a lot of years to go. But in the wild, they really don't have any predators for them, but they can succumb to injury if they're diving, chasing something, they can be injured. They can also get parasites or diseases, and sometimes they can have just a run of bad luck. Yeah.
Since you had her when she was as an infant, or first-year bird, has she gotten used to human contact, and is she attached to the human at all?
She is, she's really still wild. Sometimes the birds, if you catch them when they're nestlings, before they have imprinted on their parents and stuff that are, hand raised by people, those birds can be quite a bit different than a bird that was raised in the wild. They can get used to people if you work with them carefully. She was kind of big and ornery and got to the point where the people were scared of her, and she was not getting used. And so I had to kind of start from scratch, only she was kind of set in her ways. And it took a long time, but ultimately I got her to be able to take food from my hand, and then she would get a reward when she did something good. And so a big part of the challenge when she is in her view where she lives, when I want to take her out for the program, to get her to step up on the glove and let me attach the leash on her. And she was pretty hard to get, and she's also powerful and dangerous enough that she could hurt somebody. And so I've been working with her to get her to realize that if she steps up on the glove when I want, she'll get a reward. And if she is calm on the glove, she will get a reward. So it takes some time to build that up.
So does she trust you alone versus another person trying to get her on the glove? Does she know to
She
trust
knows
you?
me. She knows me. And so I'm working with some of the other handlers to start taking her out and using her, but she hasn't really been out a whole lot since we restarted this training. And so I wanted to
You feed her in the morning or twice a day?
they get fed 6 days a week, once a day. And so sometimes it's in the morning or sometimes it's in the afternoon, but just once a day. The hawks will only eat in the daytime. If you wait too long and put food out at night, they'll leave it until the next morning. And the owls, you can put food out in the day and they'll ignore it all day, and then at nighttime they'll finally eat it. So she gets one meal a day. We fast her 1 day a week to simulate her real environment. And in captivity they live longer. So she has a mew is a fancy name for a cage. It keeps her in, but it keeps other predators out. So if she is kind of stuck in there and not free to fly away, if she was 100% bird, nobody would get close to her. She'd be gone. Okay, but in a cage, there's not going to be a raccoon or somebody to get in and perhaps harm her. She gets fed 6 days a week. If there's bad weather, it doesn't matter. She gets fed. And if she has a problem, she sees a vet. So she's got it better than some people do, I think.
Is there any noises that will scare her, like animal noises that would frighten her?
Any sharp noise can startle her. We notice that if there's dogs around, that dogs get them wound up. Some of the birds, just people moving and noisy, will get them more. The great thing about it, and I'll get out is particularly cool, calm and collected bird. Veteran of probably thousands of programs with wiggly children, and so he's pretty cool. Scarlet, on the other hand, is a bit aloof, and this is a nice night out for her.
Doesn't he have much room to get she in there?
No, it's enough room for her to be comfortable, but not enough room for her to move around and get into trouble.
Okay.
And so that kind of design of that carrier comes from falconers. So, years ago, falconers learned how to hunt with these birds. They came up with the idea of putting the little straps on their legs, they're called jesses, and a leash and everything, and we would train them, and they came up with the concept of that carrier that lets them stand in there comfortably, gets them off the ground so that her tail feathers don't get messed up, and it's not really big enough to turn around and get into trouble.
Okay.
So those are tailored for her. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to give your group a testimonial. Earlier this summer, I had a big red-tailed hawk in my driveway that was injured or something, and you guys are out there within probably less than an hour. I think the
That's
bird-
pretty good, but we have a dispatcher and we have a bunch of volunteers, and you know, these birds can be dangerous, you can get hurt, and so our pickup people have been trained, they have gloves, they know what to do, and so we prefer generally to have one of our volunteers pick up the bird so that it's safe and bring them in.
How would they hurt you? Like, what would they do? Would they attack with their feet, their knees?
So a raptor's main weapon is their feet and their talons. So they have a sharp beak with a hook on it, and they use that for helping to tear their food apart, but it is their feet that is their big weapon. And they are intensely strong. Yes?
Yeah, how can you tell how old they are if you capture them?
You can't. The red-tailed hawk is one, and there's a number of birds that the coloring of the first feathers when they're born is different from the coloring of their, what we call adult plumage, that's year 2 through, whenever. So sometimes you can tell that first year, but after that you just know it's older than 1 year. And beyond that, sometimes there's some changes, sometimes their eyes will get a little darker, but it's really, you can't tell at all. And the only way that people are able to figure out how long they really live is that banders will go out and band the birds when they are babies. And so when there's a hawk nest and the baby hawks they grow really quick. And in about 3 or 4 weeks, they will be full size, but they won't be able to fly yet. And so the banders will climb up the tree, and when they do that, usually the parents will fly off to the side and glare at them. Sometimes the parents will come and dive down after blood, but usually they fly off and kind of glare at them, and the banders can then take the birds and put bands on, and they log that with all the bird bands are registered and tracked at a database at Cornell, I think. And so, to be a bird bander, you have to be very highly trained to make sure you don't make mistakes. And then typically you won't find anything or hear anything else about that bird until it dies and somebody finds a dead bird with a band on it. And then you can take that band, there's a phone number on it, and you call that number, you go to the website and report that we found this bird, and here's the band number, and then that will go in the database. And so then somebody can say, geez, that bird was found, in Mariemont. That bird was born in Sharonville, 13 years before. And so you can study those things and find out how long they live and where they go. But you usually only get to the real definite points are when they're born and banded and when they're dead. Let's start with
Do you ever have to trim your talons? What do you do?
We do. It's an interesting question. Their beaks and their talons are similar to our fingernails, and so they grow. And in the wild, there's kind of a natural wearing of those things, and so they're kind of naturally kept in check. And wild birds generally don't ever have any trouble with that. But in captivity, the talons tend to get long and sharp, longer and sharper than they need to be. And the beaks will get longer. And sometimes it can get to the point that they can't even out because the hook of their beak is growing so apart. So we have to work on that. And they don't like it, it's like going to the dentist. You have to grab the bird, and we try not to do that when I come to the bird and she's in her cage, she knows what the deal is. She sees the glove, and she knows that if she gets on the glove, that I will hold her steady, and I'll shake her around. He's got you. That's kind of deal, and I keep up my end of the bargain, and she will keep up her end of the bargain, which is to sit still and look impressive. Okay, but you can't do that when you're trimming their beaks. So you have to grab the bird, you have to hold their feet because they don't mean it, but they'll kill you. And wrap them up and then hold their mouth open, and I use a Dremel tool and trim their beak. It's like a cavity fix at the dentist. And we can trim their talons.
Does it hurt her, like the dentist hurts her?
No, it doesn't really, but it's like, the vibration, they don't like it, but it's not painful. It's like getting your fingernails, your toenails clipped, it's kind of a snapping thing, and you have, if you trust somebody clipping your toenails, it's not so bad, but they're just not equipped to understand that. They know it's bad and they don't like it.
Very quickly, while you're putting her back, I noticed how big her legs are. So they must be rather muscular if she's going to swoop down and grab
They are.
food.
Her legs are quite long, longer than you would think.
Yeah,
Quite strong. And in fact, when we hold a bird to make sure that we have control of it, like in a rehab bird, you want to make sure it doesn't hurt you, we grab them by their upper legs because that is the strongest place to grab them. I don't want to grab them by the wings because I can damage their feathers or hurt their wings. But if I grab her by the upper legs, that is a very strong, safe place to grab.
That's probably where most of the weight is too, isn't it?
They were very patient waiting in the boxes before the meeting, weren't they?
They are. And the birds are calmed by the dark and the quiet. And so when we find somebody and they have found an injured bird beside the road or something, sometimes it can turn into a wild goose chase. And what I'll tell somebody is, can you put a box over it? If you don't have to grab it and maybe get hurt, but if you just put a box over it. Some people, especially if it's a little bird, they'll pick up the bird, and I said, don't put it in a cage, like a bird cage, okay? Because bird cages, all the little wires, anything can catch on their feathers and damage their feathers. Tell them to put it in a cardboard box, keep it quiet and dark, and that calms the birds. Sometimes if we have the birds out on a program and there's a lot of people and the bird will get stressed out, and I can tell the bird's starting to get stressed out, back in the box, quiet, dark, I get a rest and then calm down. So this bird will be Sylvester. I can identify it.
And when does she get her treat for coming out here in the evening?
So pretty much every day in the morning or the afternoon, I'll get her and I'll get her up on the glove. I'll feed her. Sometimes I'll weigh her. We monitor the weights very closely and practice getting inside and out of the box. But I don't want to feed her right when we're leaving. Sometimes they'll toss their cookies in the cage, and I don't want that to happen. And then we'll get back and it's nighttime and she won't. But we do this often enough that she will willingly step up on my glove and be a good girl. This is Sylvester. So our rehab birds don't get names. Get that out of the way. We're required by our permits to account for every bird that we admit and the treatment and everything. And so they all get a number, but our education birds are kind of like family. They go out to lots of schools and meetings like this, and so they get named. So his name is Sylvester. This is a male great horned owl. And so a female great horned owl could be substantially larger than this. He's a little bit less than 3 pounds. We have seen some female great horned owls over 4 pounds. So his injury was found at the I-275 Lawrenceburg exit with a broken wing and a broken foot in 1997. And he was an adult when he came in, and so we don't know how old he is, but he's over 21. So he had broken his wing and broken his foot. His wing is so-so, and he's like a so-so flyer, so he can fly from the ground up to his perch, but he didn't really fly well. And in addition, he's very little strength in one of his feet. And that is really their main weapon that they hunt with. And so either one of those things would prevent him from being releasable. He has both, so he's definitely not releasable.
Their eyes are awesome, he's just penetrating us.
I call that the 1,000-yard stare. They are, they have a kind of a piercing stare that is kind of impressive.
How much does he?
A bit less than 3 pounds.
And the female would weigh?
We've seen females I've seen females over 4 pounds, but I would say on the average, a female might be closer to 3.5.
And they go for an animal 3 times their weight also?
About that, yeah. Yeah.
You, when they're in captivity that long, do you ever breed them at all?
We're not allowed to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so everything that we do is strictly controlled by our rules and our permits, and we're not allowed to.
Got it.
He seems pretty tame, is he?
He's, this is the guy, veteran of probably thousands of programs, and he's just calm and impressive. We have noticed that he's starting to slow down a little bit, so I don't know, he's over 21, but he might be 31 or might be 37, I don't know. But we can see that he's starting to slow down, and so he has an understudy that is 3 years old and is not nearly as well behaved as him, darn kids, but he is, Greyhorn owls are just really impressive birds. So
They both turned, the hawk and this one, their necks turned so far.
they can turn, in fact, all birds have 14 vertebrae in their neck, which is twice as many as we have. And all birds, they use that. They use it to preen themselves and stuff. But the thing with the owls is that their eyes are really large compared to the skull. And so where we can, without moving our head, we can move our eyes to the side and look around. The hawk, his eyes are kind of aimed out a little bit, and so he has more peripheral vision. But the owl, his eyes are fixed. He can't move them, and they're just looking straight out to the front. So if he wants to look to the side, he has to turn his head. And so you get that kind of owl turning their head kind of thing. Now he can turn his head, if he's looking forward, he can turn it all the way behind and keep on going until he's looking over his other shoulder. So that's like 270 degrees. And he's comfortable. So this owl, he could be pointing this way and looking that way as comfortable as anything. And all day, it's not a stretch for him.
How old do they get?
So, like these big birds, I think the record for gray horned owls in the wild is like 28 years. But again, the bigger birds, 10, 15 is kind of a typical lifetime.
Is he considered an average size?
Yeah, I'd say he's average for a male. So a female would be 20% bigger. Maybe. Sometimes people say, I saw this owl and he was that tall. It's like, I caught this fish and he was that long.
Yeah.
But they kind of get taller and bigger at nighttime when they surprise you.
There's some owl that must be over by the bell tower. I don't know if you guys hear him. He howls at night like he hoots or whatever
So
it's called.
it's unusual to see one of these birds, but you might hear them.
That's,
so
you can hear him.
A great horned owl is the one that people call a hoot owl, and he has a hoot that kind of goes like,
Yeah, he lives
and a lot of times, in fact, we get into November, maybe you might hear him on a crisp night, and you'll hear one call, and you'll hear another answer from another direction. And they're finding their mates, and they're getting together, and they are the first birds to be on a nest with eggs. Usually they're sitting on eggs in February, so they have to jump on everybody. So it's kind of interesting. A great horned owl is not a nest builder, so they will find a spot that looks okay and use it. And one of the spots that they'll use a lot of times is an old hawk nest. So a red-tailed hawk is an industrious bird. They think, all right, let's make a nest. And a red-tailed hawk will typically make a big nest out of sticks. You won't see a lot of leaves in it like a squirrel's nest, but a lot of sticks. And it'll be usually out on a branch, a little bit away from the center of the tree, out on the branch. It'll be a good-sized nest. And the red-tailed hawks, if their same couple is still alive and healthy, they might come around the spring and say, how about that nest that we used last year? Let's go back and check it out. We might have to spruce it up a little bit, do a little maintenance, but do that. What will happen is the great horned owls get there first. Okay, great horned owls are the first to lay eggs, and they'll find that old hawk nest and say, well, this looks like a pretty good place, and they'll set up. And when the hawks come around, they find mama great horned owl in that nest, and they know better than to fight her. They'll just go build another nest.
So will they try to get each other's eggs or food, or do they fight between the owl and the hawk?
When there's babies are helpless and good eating. And so when the young have hatched, the parents will be trying to guard them and dote on them. If they are unguarded, a hawk would come in and eat owl babies, and an owl would come in and eat hawk babies. It's a delicate time for them, and in fact, about only 50% of birds that are hatched, make it to their first birthday. It's a tough thing. But once they make it and they become an experienced hunter, there's like nothing that's going to catch them and eat them. They've made it.
And they'll go after small domestic pets also.
Yes, they will. And I say great horned owls are even ornerier than red-tailed hawks. And so they'll eat a lot of stuff. And because their diet is very broad, they'll eat a lot of things. You find them everywhere. And so, mice, rats, snakes, chickens, if you're trying to grow chickens in your backyard, bunny rabbits, squirrels, all those kind of things they will eat. A great horned owl, it's not his first choice, but a great horned owl will kill and eat a skunk. They have very good eyesight and very good hearing, but they don't smell and it doesn't bother them. And we'll get a great horned owl in every now and then that reeks because he's tangled with a skunk. And they're not afraid of the skunk.
You said, do you you personally visit these, your bird 6 days a week?
Usually.
Okay.
Usually. We have some of the birds I'll say, don't need as much training, or, like our screech owls, our little bitty owls. And during the day, they'll hide out in a nest box, a little hole in the side, just, fly right in there. And they'll stay in there all day, and they won't come out till nighttime. Okay, now I want to take one of the screech owls out for a program. I go to the nest box and sit right there, and I grab a hold of the little leash, the leads on her jesses, and grab it, and I've got the bird. Okay, the bigger birds, you just can't go in there, and they can hurt you. They can avoid you. It's harder to get them, and so. Some of the bigger birds are the ones that need to have more training to be able to get them and have them work.
Does the feeding have to be done by the same person?
We have started with one person and then expanded it. And so, and I'm kind of in the process of starting to take, this bird is just an experienced bird, and he's really easy. Anybody can come into the cage and he will step up on the glove and be patient while they get him all the leash on and everything. The red-tailed hawk is a whole other thing, and so I'm working with one of the guys to bring him into the fold. Our peregrine falcon, she's gone through over the years, sometimes she's hard to get, and so we've done the whole training routine with her, and so now she's looking for a prize. And if you come in there and you have a little treat for her, she steps right up on the glove. And it took one guy to do the basic training, but now we've expanded that to all of our educators. And so they can come in and they know the game. They'll have a little treat for her. And when they come in there, hold out their glove with a treat, and she'll step right up.
What's a treat?
Treat is usually a piece of cut up mouse or rat.
Delicious.
Yum, yum.
What do you feed them every day?
So they get dead food. In the real world, they would eat live things. They would kill them and then eat them. Most of them get used to eating dead things pretty quick. Our program birds we've had for years, and so they know the deal. But the rehab birds that come in, they're used to hunting and killing their food. And sometimes it takes a little while to get them to figure it out. And so sometimes I might take a mouse and have to slit it open and put it in their cage, and they'll figure it out. And then after a while, I can throw mice in there, and they'll be okay. We've had sometimes we get some birds that just will not eat something that's not live. You know, we had a rough-legged hawk, and he was in rehab, and he would not eat except for live food, and it was a real hardship for us. But we don't get a lot of rough-legged hawks, and we got through and rehabbed him and released him. Generally, all the food we feed is mostly like mice and rats. Also quail, we like quail, and sometimes hail chicks for them. They don't get as varied a menu as they would get in the wild, but we try to vary it around. We actually have some special vitamins for raptors for that. And some of the birds, like a Cooper's hawk or a peregrine falcon, is mostly a bird eater. And so we try to have birds for them, like quail. And most of them will eat the mice and the rats.
Is there any of those peregrine falcons around here?
Oh, sure, downtown. There used to be no peregrine falcons like east of Mississippi because of DDT. The DDT, the bugs ate it, and then birds ate bugs, and they got the poison in them, and then raptors ate those birds, and it got into their systems. And so peregrine falcons, it made their eggs fail, and there was none. And so it's in the 90s, some people got together, they called themselves a peregrine fund, and they got some pairs of peregrine falcons from out west, and they reintroduced them. And peregrines like high cliffs is what their natural habitat is. And so people said, well, what have we got like that? Skyscrapers, okay? And so they put nest boxes on skyscrapers all around on the eastern United States. And so we had a nest box on the 27th floor of the PNC Bank building downtown. There's also a nest box about halfway up on one of the towers at the mighty Fort Power Plant. There's nests in downtown Dayton and Columbus and stuff. And the birds took to it. And so there's not a lot of them, but they used to be endangered in Ohio, and it was downgraded to threatened, and now they're not even threatened anymore. So there's not a lot of them, but they're out there. They like downtown because they like the heights on the buildings, and they also like hunting over the Ohio River. Because a peregrine falcon is hunting other birds while they're flying. And so if the other bird is flying along, minding his own business, the peregrine is much higher altitude. They'll spot it and go into this high-speed dive and bang, hit it right in midair, and that's how they hunt. And when they're out over the river, there is no cover. So they like that.
What kind of birds, like robins or?
Anything. You know, people talk about the peregrines keeping the pigeons in check, but the pigeons are almost always on the ground. Okay, so they're not really the first choice. Their first choice is a bird that's flying, and anything that's flying. You know, people have seen a peregrine. The guys out in Miami Fort saw a peregrine hit a turkey vulture, which I can't imagine what they eat a turkey vulture, because what they eat is really bad. But
Well, you say those are
what?
turkey vultures, don't you have say those?
We do.
Yeah.
We do vultures as well. So, anyway, I guess he eats a lot of stuff that, like the red tail, and owls are also known for silent flyers, and so they don't have to flap a lot. Let's see, get his wings up here. There we go. So he's got pretty broad wings, and it's sort of like a biplane. You know, they don't have to go too fast to fly. He doesn't have to flap too much to fly. Spread those wings out, he can kind of glide and float. And he's got just like a little special fringe on the leading edge of his wings to help smooth the air and make it quiet. and they have feathers that go all the way down his toes to his talons. So he's kind of got a number of things that combine to make him a real silent flyer. And so while the hawk might have been up, maybe at the top of a tree or a light pole, maybe 50 feet up, and he's watching stuff kind of farther away, the horned owl might be 20 foot off the ground and looking at something that's closer to him. But he's going to be very quiet, and he's going to be looking, and he's going to be listening. And when he hears a little rustle in the leaves or he sees something, they have very good night vision, he'll kind of locate in on it and then kind of jump off of his perch, and without hardly flapping at all and without making any noise, he'll just glide right down and surprise him and grab him.
He's
Amazing. He's beautiful.
the flatness of their faces, and that helps with their hearing and their vision.
Yeah,
Is that
well,
right?
they're hearing more. They say it's sort of like a dish. It helps to focus the sound to their ears.
Yeah.
Their ears are not on the top of the head where those feathers are. Those feathers, we call them ear tufts, but they really have nothing to do with his ears. They just kind of break up his outline to help camouflage him. His ears are kind of little holes in the side of his head, but the feathers help to guide the sound in there so that he can hear well. It's interesting that his feathers on the top of his head, you can kind of make them go up and go down, to control that a little bit. He's got them kind of in the middle maybe right now, but I tell people it's sort of like a dog. When a dog is happy, his ears are up and his tail's wagging, and when a dog is mad or afraid, the ears go down. And so the owl can do that same thing. When he's mad or stressed, those ear tufts can come down, and when they're sticking up, you can tell he's chilling.
He's a little man.
He is, maybe a little bit.
Sir,
Yeah.
I know 20 years ago, owls were very endangered species. What's the status now?
Okay, I would say they haven't been endangered. They've been out there, but probably 15 years or so ago, we had a West Nile virus, and we still have a little bit, but when West Nile first came, it hit certain species of birds really hard, and great horned owls were one of them. And there was just, I'll say, hundreds of great horned owls that we found dead. And we got, in a normal year, we might get 30 or 40 great horned owls, and we got, like 200. And they almost all died. There's nothing you can do. By the time they came in, they were goners. And yet, several years later, the population has rebounded. And so, they're the ones that are left, I guess, are resistant to the West Nile virus, and the population is able to replenish itself fairly quick. So it's interesting that, in a healthy environment, you have the prey items like the mice and the rats and the snakes, and you have the predators like the raptors. And, people say the raptors, keep the rats in check, get those rodents, but the rodents limit the raptors. So it's all in balance. If you had no rodents, you would have no raptors. So you really have to have both to make the world go round and be happy. Yeah.
Do you think, as a general rule, then, that DDT, because I knew with the bald eagle, they were endangered, and when the DDT was gone, they are flourishing now, and they're no longer endangered?
Sort of the same story. So we don't see a lot of bald eagles, but there are more and more of them. And people that are observant we'll see bald eagles even in the Cincinnati area from time to time. They've kind of taken them off the endangered list. It's still a treat to see one, but they've really made a comeback. They're doing well. I don't know how much time I can kind of answer questions and go forever.
Yeah, let's just do questions.
Got a few more minutes.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. This was a fascinating presentation.
I invite you all. We have an open house at the Raptor Center. We're not normally open to the public, but on the last Sunday of the month, we've got a website you can get on and find this information, but the last Sunday of the month, so we will have one in October, which is not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, and the last Sunday in November, we will have an open house. And that is Sunday from 1 to 4, and you can come out and see our facility and stuff like that. I've got some brochures up here if anybody wants to grab one. And if you're interested, I got a few calendars. We have photographers take pictures of our birds, and we make a new calendar every year, and we make a little money off of them. So I got some for $15 if anybody's interested. Grab a brochure, and I'd like to invite you all to come out and see our facility and meet the rest of the birds. And we're pretty hyped up about Raptors. I think we're a volunteer organization, and everybody is doing it because they like it and because it's cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.